So for the most part on my channel, I've been taking you guys through my journey on how I shoot, mainly with a lot of bright color palettes. Well, what about brands that don't use bright color palettes, and what about brands that use a lot more darker color palettes? So today is all about exploring that. So one of the most important things you can do as a photographer is try and assess what is the tone of the brand that you're working with. Sometimes they might be bright and bubbly, very colourful like Collusion, or in this case we're going to be working with Partisan clothing today. They have a much darker colour palette, which means I'm probably not going to use locations with a lot of vivid colours. I'm probably going to use locations that are quite mysterious, dark, decrepit, derelict, places that kind of resemble kind of like future dystopia wastelands. Definitely check them out, they're an amazing brand. They've just launched their new line of clothing, again inspired by things like tech wear and a lot of dark colour palettes. Big shout out, as always, to Mayank for doing the behind the scenes in today's video. We're going to go look at all the different locations that we filmed in and how you guys can take advantage of a similar colour palette and maybe similar brands that you might work with. So this time we're back at a pretty familiar location. You guys might have seen this in my last videos. We're back against the stone walls. These are a great option to use for mono or dark colour palettes, and they do really well in complementing those colour palettes. We kept the posing pretty simple to try and add a bit of maturity to the brand, because that's what the brand was kind of going for. But there are some things that I do keep in mind when I'm posing. So one of them is to try and close those gaps in between your models. Sometimes if your gaps are too far wide, the center of attraction goes past the models and into the center of the image, which might just be some dead space. So I tend to close the gap between my models and find creative ways to pose them. I also like experimenting with foreground and background posing. Try and use different inspirations and techniques for this, but switch between both models and see which dynamic works best for you. So this is another great location. It's in Northern Quarter and it's amazing for its versatility. You can have a lot of fun posing in this area, especially if you use the environment to your advantage and just start using the gates and the bars. So in this shot we started getting the model to interact a lot more with the environment. So these gates were perfect for a seated pose. We used his arm to kind of hold on to the gate, spreading out a bit more of his legs, and it kind of leads up nicely into the lights that you see behind him. So the image is a lot more engaging than just sitting down and not doing anything interesting with the environment that you're in. So take advantage of the environment that you're using. Find ways to be creative in it. So focal length is another trick that I always try and depend on. Depending on what kind of shot you're using, I'm pretty much using a 35mm Sigma 1.4. In this case, we're shooting the jacket as our main primary option. I had a little bit of trouble trying to get the best of both worlds, where I wanted the best of the environment and the best of the model in. I had to try and make some compromises, as you can see in some of these images. Trying really hard to try and get the model and that nice looking ventilation and the repetition of the buildings at the top, but then his legs might get cut out, or if the ventilation has to get cut out, and that's purely because I'm considering the Instagram crop, because that's what my content is made for. So instead I made a compromise. If the jacket is the main thing I'm shooting, I'm just going to cut the legs, and that way I did a low angle shot, and it really helps this image because now you have an image that scaffolds all the way from top to bottom. So you've got the jacket that looks really nice with the pose, and then leading up you've kind of got this overarching intimidating building that's kind of looking down on the model, and it's just a lot more aesthetic and a lot more pleasing, especially with the ventilation. It just looks a lot more dystopia like the brand was going for. So my tip for you guys is don't forget to look up. So we're at the last location now, and I'm going to give you guys some tips on framing this time. One of the techniques that I always rely on is composition. So before I even start posing the models, I'm literally just getting my camera and just looking and trying to compose what looks good and where looks good to shoot. As you can see, I mainly shoot vertical only because, like I said before, most of my content is for Instagram. But also remember, if a brand is going to do a new launch, whether it's a new spring, autumn, winter, summer launch, chances are they're probably going to want some website pictures. So here are some few images that I also took in landscape. Do both. So when shooting vertically, I mainly like to use the rule of thirds. It keeps my images quite well balanced, and because I'm not a classic portrait shooter, I'd consider myself more as an environmental portrait photographer. I'm trying to consider both the subject and the environment with a nice balance. So at least at the top, 1/3 of my frame will always have a lot of headroom just to show where I'm shooting. So the environment, the architecture, any buildings, anything like that. Again, it's another reason why full frame cameras really help. Wide angle focal lengths like 35 really help, because it's a nice balance between trying to get the subject and the environment in. Of course, you can go a lot wider. You can still get a 24mm, or you can even go even wider and get a 10mm for those dramatic shots. But for me, the 35 is a really sweet spot where I can keep that detail without distorting that image too much. So my last piece of advice would be pay attention to your environment and the small details that surround it. So in this location, I found that there was this really harsh light and it was giving some light onto these really decrepit cobwebs, and I found that really interesting. Kind of fits with the brand's tone again, kind of going for this wasteland zombie apocalypse sort of derelict car park background. So it kind of added to the theme. So again, I made that compromise like I did with the last pictures. Instead of shooting straight on where I'd probably lose that angle of the light, I shot at lower angle, compromised on the legs, cropped it out, and now you've got a much more aesthetic image where the eye just nicely leads from both models onto that creepy looking lights and cobwebs, and just makes for a much more engaging image. Looking around a little bit more, I also saw that there was this bright orange unapologetic pipe that was just in the middle of all these dull colors. So again, it's adding a bit of contrast to your image. You're working with a lot of these dark color palettes, but don't be afraid to kind of have some minimal color drops here and there that really make your picture stand out. It's a nice contrast. And last but not least, here are some BTS shots of the last location, which we didn't have enough time to do any BTS filming in. Again, it was a really good location, similar to the previous one, using the same concepts that we've used from the previous locations and the same ideas. So that's the end of the video. Thanks so much for all the support you guys have given me in 2019. It's been an amazing journey. I've met so many amazing people, worked on so many amazing projects. Stay tuned for 2020, I've got even more amazing projects. Check out the new Manchester's Creative Photographer Network group called What's Your Tone. If you want to join me or any other amazing creatives in Manchester, come and just collaborate with us, create content with us. We're always going to be having new dates each month of the meetups. It's a great opportunity. We've met so many amazing people through that. And as always guys, make sure you like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in 2020.